They gave me the posting because I was 26 years old and nobody important enough to waste on a real assignment. That is, I think, the most honest account of how I ended up aboard ECS Provisional Weight as a witness designate attached to Rear Admiral Sasha Orven's command element during the assembly period at Dry Dock Kessler 9. The posting order read, Junior Bridge Officer, Records and Communications, Temporary Assignment pending operational commencement, which is fleet language for, we need someone to sign the logs, we need that someone to be commissioned, and we need the commissioned someone to be young enough that losing them to a paperwork error won't constitute a measurable tragedy for the service. I was 26, I was commissioned. I had made to that point no measurable contributions to the fleet, the Earth Compact, or indeed to anything beyond a moderately competent performance review filed by a Commander Sela Wynn, who described me in writing as adequate in the technical sense and unlikely to cause embarrassment. I framed it. It hangs in my office now, and I think it is the finest professional assessment I have ever received, because Commander Wynn had, in her career, met people who had caused embarrassment, and I was not one of them. Kessler 9 is a dry dock facility in the outer margin of the Vethris Belt, which is itself an unremarkable stretch of debris and processed ore waypoints that the Compact uses for facilities it prefers not to advertise in the public navigation charts. The facility does not appear on commercial maps. It is not listed in the Compact Civil Registry's Infrastructure Index. If you query the Vethris Belt designation from any civilian terminal, you receive a routing advisory about ore particulate density and a suggested alternate course. The facility was, for the 6 months I spent there before the Censure departed, busiest installation I had ever seen in my professional life, which had admittedly been short. 350 warships do not assemble quietly, even at an unlisted facility. The berths at Kessler 9 had been extended twice in the 14 months prior to my arrival. The second extension completed barely 3 weeks before the first hulls began docking in formation. The ships came in by squadron, running dark, the running lights suppressed below the standard active navigation threshold, and they filled the berths, in it someone, with a much longer career and a much higher clearance than mine, had clearly planned down to the I watched them from the observation level of the command module on my first morning aboard, a level I had been assigned access to because someone in the posting chain had apparently decided that a witness designate ought to be able to witness, and I counted 17 hulls in that formation alone, settling into their berths with the particular unhurried precision of ships that had been traveling a long time and were not in any hurry to begin what came next. The Provisional Weight was already berthed when I arrived. She is a heavy command cruiser, not the largest ship in the Censure by a considerable margin. That distinction belonged to the 3 assault carriers, compact designation CAH-7, CH-9, and CH-12, each of which I found genuinely disconcerting to stand next to on the docking level, in the way that you find very large things disconcerting when you are standing next to them, without enough context to understand them. But she is the ship from which Rear Admiral Orven would run the operation, and so she is the ship I came to know. The cruiser's hull was marked with the standard compact operational gray finish, dull and maintenance-worn, in the way of ships that have been pulled from regular rotation for a purpose that required pulling from regular rotation, and her docking moorings were newer than the rest of the hull, which I noted because newer fittings on an older hull indicate a refit, and a refit on a ship being posted to a secret dry dock for an assembly of 350 warships indicates that someone planned for this ship specifically, which is a different thing from a ship that happened to be available. I want to be careful here, writing this, what I knew at the time versus what I came to understand. At 26, standing on the observation level watching ships dock, I knew the broad shape of what had happened. Everyone in the Compact knew the broad shape. The Tharessi Collective and its absorption drone program had been a matter of public record for going on 4 years by the time I received my posting, Kessler 9, and the diplomatic history, the protests, the counterinterpretations, the treaty language disputes, furls to the Joint Resource Convention arbitration panel. The subsequent referrals to the Compact Emergency Council, the subsequent silence of the Emergency Council, had been covered extensively enough that a person paying ordinary attention to public affairs had encountered most of it. I paid ordinary attention. I knew, in the way that most people knew, something bad had happened, and that the Compact's formal response had been ongoing for quite a while without resolving. What I did not know, until I arrived at Kessler 9 and was granted clearance to the records section of the command module, was what something bad actually meant in figures. The operations brief was filed in the provisional weights records section, under designation Pre-01, which stands for Pre-Verified Censure, Document 1. It ran to 412 pages. I was given 2 days to read it. I was not told why 2 days specifically, and I did not ask, because I was 26, and I was not in the habit of asking questions to which answer would not help me do my job any better than I was already doing it. I sat in the records section with a cup of tea that went cold, and then was replaced by another cup of tea that also went cold. And I read. The Tharessi Collective entered the public record of Earth at Compact Tharessi Demolished in the 43rd year of the Compact's existence, of expansion period, when humanity was establishing fringe colony worlds at a rate that substantially exceeded its capacity to defend or administer them. The Tharessi were, by the assessment of every diplomatic and intelligence review of that era, a reasonable partner. They occupied a region of space well removed from the primary fringe expansion corridors. They had advanced materials processing technology that the Compact wanted access to, and they wanted, in exchange, navigational transit rights through Compact-controlled corridors that provided substantially shorter travel routes for their own expansion traffic. The Resource and Transit Agreement of Year 43 was, by every review I have ever read, a sensible document. Both parties received what they required. Both parties signed. Both parties, for approximately 19 years, adhered to the agreement's terms with no recorded incidents. There were cultural exchanges, a minor navigational rights sub-agreement in Year 51, and a resource-sharing addendum in Year 57 that the Compact's review boards described at the time as mutually beneficial. The Tharessi Collective attended 3 joint Compact summits during that period, and contributed, by all accounts, constructive technical expert on materials processing standards. They were, in Year 61, considered among the more reliable of the Compact's treaty partners. I note this because it matters. What happened in Year 62 was not the act of a civilization that had always been hostile. It was the act of a civilization that made a calculation, and the calculation was about resource efficiency, and the result of the calculation was that human colonial lives did not factor into it. In Year 62, the Tharessi Collective's expansion program encountered a resourcing problem. The brief described it in the language of a Tharessi internal document that Compact intelligence had recovered approximately 8 years after the fact. The Collective's primary ore extraction network, located in a region of space designated in their own charts as the Velthus Processing Zone, had been progressively depleted over the preceding decade, and the Collective's modelers had determined that the zone would reach non-viable extraction thresholds within 11 years. The Collective's expansion program required a specific grade of silicate-bearing composite ore processed to a standard that the Velthus zone had historically provided. Without a new extraction source, the program would stall. The modelers presented their findings. The Collective's Resource Directorate reviewed them. A solution was identified. The solution, as documented in the same internal archive, was the absorption drone program. The drones were autonomous extraction units, capable of long-range independent operation, designed to identify suitable raw material sources and begin demolition and extraction procedures without requiring ongoing logistical support from the Collective's central operations. They were, by the technical specifications in the brief, genuinely impressive pieces of engineering. They could assess a structure's composite material composition from orbital distance, calculate extraction yield, prioritize demolition sequencing for maximum efficiency, and process extracted materials on-site for transport. They could operate for extended periods on local energy sourcing. They were, the brief noted, not equipped with any mechanism for identifying whether a structure was inhabited at the time of demolition. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. The brief was careful about it. The Tharessi Collective's internal documentation, the same documentation their resource directorate had reviewed before authorizing the program, acknowledged all that the drone systems lacked inhabited structure identification protocols. This was noted as a parameter to be addressed in a subsequent program refinement. The program was authorized anyway, pending that refinement. The refinement was never implemented. The drones were deployed. The first deployment reached Fringe Colony Sector 9 Marin in year 62, month 4. Sector 9 Marin was a fringe settlement of 4 colonies, the oldest established 11 years prior, with a combined registered population at the time of 1800 human civilians, agricultural workers, infrastructure crews, their families, a medical relay station, a small compact administrative post. The drones arrived in the early hours of the local morning cycle, assessed the settlement structure's composite material content, determined it met extraction thresholds, and began demolition procedures. The administrative post's emergency transmitter was activated at local hour 0314. The signal was standard compact emergency format. Facility under attack, nature unknown, requesting immediate response. Standard format means a specific things in compact protocol. Relay network picks it up, routes it to the nearest manned station, flags it for escalation. The relay network at that margin of space was, in year 62, a chain of 4 automated relay points, each adding 11 to 15 days of transit time to any signal moving toward the compact's core systems. The transmission reached the nearest compact relay station 11 days later. The relay station forwarded it to Compact Regional Command, which escalated it to the Emergency Council. By the time the Emergency Council received the forwarded transmission and convened a review session, 43 days had elapsed since the drones arrived at Sector 9 Marin. The brief listed what remained of Sector 9 Marin's 4 colonies in an appendix. The appendix was 41 pages long. 41 pages were a names list. I finished reading the appendix at 11 in the evening on the first day. I sat with the document on the terminal for a while. The record section was empty except for me. The provisional weights systems ran at their standard low operational hum. I made another cup of tea, which also went cold. I want to say something here about the next 22 years of diplomatic record that the brief covers, because I think it matters for understanding what Kessler 9 was. The compact sent a formal protest to the Tharessi Collective in year 62, month 7. The collective responded in year 62, month 9, to the effect that the resource and transit agreement of year 43 did not contain explicit prohibitions against automated resource extraction in unclaimed space. The compact's legal review of this response took 5 months, at the end of which the compact's legal counsel determined that the fringe colony sectors in question had not been formally designated as compact, sovereign territory in the treaty's terms, an oversight in the original document that the drafting team in year 43 had not anticipated, because no one in year 43 had anticipated autonomous mining drones as a category of concern. The compact filed an amendment request. The collective declined to negotiate an amendment on the grounds that the existing agreement was in their view sufficient. The compact escalated to the Joint Resource Convention Arbitration Panel. The arbitration panel convened in year 63, deliberated for 14 months, and issued a finding that the matter fell outside its jurisdictional remit. The drones continued their program. The brief contained a table. The table listed 9 fringe colony sectors addressed by the absorption drone program over the 22 years, from year 62 to year 84, the year the Compact's Emergency Council authorized the verified censure. The table listed each sector's pre-demolition population, post-demolition's survivor count, and the cause of death classification in the Tharessi Collective's internal accounting system. Cause of death classification in every entry was the same, 5 words. Incidental displacement loss, non-factor, 4,847 names. That was the total. Not the round number I had known from public coverage, which always cited 4,800, because round numbers are what public coverage uses and precision is what record sections use. 4,847 human civilians, killed when the drones demolished structures that were occupied at the time, across 9 colony sectors. Over 22 years, each death logged by the Tharessi Collective's Resource Directorate as incidental displacement loss, non-factor, in the same format, in the same 5 words as though the format itself were sufficient to conclude the matter. I finished the brief at 2:40 in the morning on the second day. I filed my record section sign-off, which is a formality that the system requires before a witness designate is considered briefed, and I went to my bunk. I did not sleep especially well. The next morning I reported to the bridge of the provisional weight for the first time in my operational capacity, which meant I sat at the communications and records station on the port side of the bridge, 3rd row, and confirmed that all transmit and receive systems were within normal parameters. They were. I logged that they were. Rear Admiral Orvin was at the command position, reviewing an assembly status summary with her flag captain, a tall, precise woman named Eda Varos, who had the particular quality of very experienced senior officers of appearing to be doing nothing while doing a deal. I noted, because it was my job to note such things, that the assembly at Kessler 9 was at that point 91.4% complete, with the remaining hulls expected to dock within 9 days. The Rear Admiral did not acknowledge my presence on the bridge, which was correct protocol. A junior officer in a communications watch role is a functional fixture, not a social occasion. And I did not expect acknowledgement. I did my job, she did hers. On my 3rd morning, I introduced myself to the senior communications officer, a lieutenant commander named Pel Osar, who was approximately 12 years older than me and who responded to my introduction with the expression of a person who has been handed a form they did not ask for and cannot immediately determine where to file it. Pel Osar was, I would come to learn over the following months, a reasonable and competent officer who simply found enthusiasm exhausting and had long since decided that a controlled neutrality was the most efficient state in which to do his job. He assigned me a work rotation, told me the coffee in the secondary galley was better than the coffee in the primary galley on account of a water filtration unit that someone had maintained correctly, and told me that if I had questions I should ask Senior Specialist Dari Yount, 'cause she had been on this ship longer than anyone in the communications section and knew where everything was. I asked Dari Yount a great many questions over the following months, and she answered most of them. And she told me the rest were above her clearance, which was a more diplomatic way of indicating that they were also above mine. Dari Yount had been on the provisional weight for 9 years. She had, she told me, put in for a transfer twice and been declined twice, and had at some point decided this was simply where she worked, and had made her peace with it, in the way that people make their peace with things, when the alternative is not making peace with them, and finding that considerably worse. She was from Sector 3 Velant originally, which is a fringe colony world. I did not ask whether she knew anyone in the affected sectors. It was not the kind of question I thought she would want to answer, and even if she had wanted to answer, it was not the kind of answer that would have helped either of us do our jobs any better than we were already doing them. So I did not ask and she did not say, and we worked our watches. During the assembly period, the facility ran a continuous 12-hour primary cycle and a reduced 8-hour secondary cycle, and during those hours the berths processed ships at a rate that I came to track almost as a reflex. The same person who works near any large ongoing operation eventually begins to track its rhythms whether they intend to or not. By the end of the 2nd week I could, without checking the assembly status display, estimate within 2 ships how many remained to dock, based on the volume and character of the facility's processing traffic. I noted this in my personal log as a likely symptom of having insufficient other things to think about during off-watch hours. The personal log, which I began in the 2nd week of the assembly period, is the document I have been drawing on for much of this account, supplemented by the official records. Because the personal log is where I wrote down what the official records did not have room for, which was most of what I was actually experiencing. I wrote in the personal log about the PREVC brief, not a summary. I had the summary in the record search system, but an attempt to put in my own words what it felt like to read 412 pages of documented atrocity that had been ongoing for 22 years while the compact filed paperwork. I wrote that it felt like reading a very long account of a thing everyone already knew about, but had been hoping would resolve without requiring them do anything definitive, and that at some point between year 70 and year 80. The brief was not precise on when the political calculation shifted, only that it had shifted. The compact had apparently concluded that it was not going to resolve that way. I wrote that this conclusion seemed correct but also late. I wrote that late was probably not a useful moral category in retrospect, and that the court's job was to document what happened and when, not to assess the timing of decisions that had been made by people with information I did not have. I wrote that I was aware I was 26 years old and doing the records section of a warship assembly operation, and that my opinions about timing of compact emergency council decisions were of limited relevance to anyone, including myself. I wrote that I would keep writing down what I thought anyway, because the personal log was mine and I could. The assembly completed on a Tuesday, which struck me at the time as a very ordinary day of the week for something as large as 350 warships to finish arriving at a secret dry dock. The final formation came in at 9:22 local facility time, 6 hulls in echelon, and when the last of them locked into its berth, the operational readiness indicator on the bridge's main display shifted from amber to green in a way that was very quiet for something that meant what it meant. Pel Osar noted it in the communications log. I noted it in the records log. Rear Admiral Orven, at the command position, looked at the display for a moment, and then said something to Flag Captain Varos that I was not close enough to hear. Varos nodded, and that was the extent of the ceremony. I had imagined, in the abstract way you imagine things before they happen, that a moment as significant as 350 warships reaching full assembly might be marked differently. A statement, perhaps, a general broadcast to the fleet, or at minimum someone saying something notable enough to record. There was none of that. The display went green. The watch continued. I noted in the records log, assembly complete, 350 hulls confirmed, year 84, month 7, day 14, 09/22 facility time. I moved to the next log entry. We departed Kessler 9 14 days later, after a pre-departure check cycle that I recorded in 47 separate log entries, which I understand to be a record for a single-shift communications watch, and which Pel Osar acknowledged with the neutral expression I had by then learned to read as moderately approving. The departure itself was less dramatic than the assembly, which had been less dramatic than I had imagined, which was establishing a pattern. The ships left their berths by element in the sequence the operational schedule specified, and the drives came up in order, and the formation organized itself according to a plan that had been filed and approved and reviewed at levels well above mine, and the provisional weight took her position at the center of the command element, and the Vethris belts, or particulate haze, thinned around us as we accelerated to transit speed, and the facility at Kessler 9 became a smaller and smaller point in the navigational display until the display's resolution defaulted to summary mode and it was gone. The transit to Tharessi collective space takes 18 days at combat speed. I spent days doing my job, involved a great deal of monitoring transmit channels, confirming encryption integrity on outbound scheduling traffic, and updating the operational status logs that the command element generates continuously even when the operation has not yet technically begun. I also, during the quieter watch periods, continued reading the supplementary documents in the PEVC series, ran to 7 volumes, and which I had not finished during my 2-day briefing period. Volume 2 covered the year 63 through year 71 period, which is the period in which the compact's diplomatic efforts were most active and, most consistently, unavailing. 3 covered year 71 through year 78, which is the period in which the pace of diplomatic activity slowed. The brief attributed to a shift in the Compact Emergency Council's internal assessment of the arbitration process's viability, and which privately attributed in the personal log to fatigue. Year 78 marks the point in the Compact's public record at which references to Tharessi collective diplomatic proceedings become less frequent, and the Emergency Council's quarterly infrastructure reports begin showing line items. Dry dock expansion at facilities whose locations are not publicly specified. I noted this in the personal log as a thing I found it interesting that the public record contained. If you were the kind of person who read Compact Emergency Council quarterly infrastructure reports, which I was, because I worked in a record section, and reading reports was the principal activity of my professional life. The sixth volume was the compact legal determination that had finally, in year 84, concluded that the Tharessi Collective's absorption drone program constituted a violation of Article 7 of the Joint Compact Charter, which is the article regarding deliberate or negligent acts resulting in civilian mortality in contested or protected space. The determination was careful to apply the negligent standard rather than the deliberate standard, which the Compact's legal counsel had assessed as the more defensible basis given the available documentation and the need to withstand a legal challenge in any subsequent review proceeding. The determination was 211 pages long and had taken, from initial filing to final determination, 9 years to produce. I noted in the personal log that the Tharessi Compact Resource Directorate had, during those same 9 years, filed the last 1/200 or so of the 4,847 deaths. I noted it and I moved on, because the determination had been made, and the censure had been authorized and the ships were moving, and the purpose of noting things is to have a record. Not to sit with what the record says until it becomes something other than a record. I was 26 and I was on a warship, and there was nothing I could do about the 9 years, except be accurate about them in the log. We entered Tharessi space on day 18. The collective had been formally notified of the verified censure under the terms of the Charter's Article 7, response provisions, which require notification but not consent. The notification had been delivered to the collective's Diplomatic Bureau 14 days prior to our departure, which was itself 2 days before the assembly at Kessler 9 was complete. The timing of that detail, notified before assembly finished, departed before any response arrived through official channels, was the sort of thing I noted without comment in the records log, because it was accurate, and because the records log does not require me to provide analysis of the things I note. I noted it. I moved on. The collective's diplomatic bureau had responded to the notification within 6 hours with a communication expressing the proposed action was disproportionate and requesting immediate cessation of preparations. That communication was logged. The collective's bureau sent a second communication 8 hours after the first, reiterating the disproportionality concern and requesting an emergency arbitration session. That was logged. A third communication arrived the following day. This one from what the routing header identified as the Tharessi Collective's Ministerial Council, expressing in considerably more urgent language that the verified censure constituted a unilateral act of aggression, and demanding immediate withdrawal. That was logged. Communications 4 through 11 arrived over the following 12 days, escalating in register and decreasing in specificity of demand, in the way that communications tend to do when the party sending them has realized that the party receiving them is continuing to prepare and is not going to stop preparing. Those were logged. We did not respond to any of them. That was not my decision. It was, as I understood it, a deliberate operational posture established at a level above Rear Admiral Orven, though she had clearly concurred with it. The Compact's legal basis for the censure was the Article 7 determination. The determination spoke for itself. Everything the Compact intended to say had been said in the notification. What the Tharessi Collective had to say in response was, at this point, a matter for the record and not for the operation. On day 1 of operations, 18 days after we departed Kessler 9, the verified censure arrived at the first designated address in the operational schedule, Tharessi Collective Extraction Facility, THVAR 3, located in the outer margin of what the collective's charts designated as the Velthus Processing Zone, which is the same zone whose depletion had led their resource directorate to authorize the absorption drone program 2 years prior. THVAR 3 was one of the largest operating extraction installations in the collective's current network. The operational schedule described it as a military-grade extraction and processing complex with active defensive positioning. Censure's assault carriers addressed it with their forward elements. The operation took 4 hours and 11 minutes. I sat at my communication station and logged the transmit traffic. This is not a glamorous sentence. It is an accurate one. A junior bridge officer's experience of a fleet operation is, with very few exceptions, the experience of monitoring a series of channel indicators and confirming that the traffic moving through them is correctly formatted and correctly did, and logging that it is. The engagement itself, if you can call it an engagement, I think implies more symmetry than the action at THVR3 possessed. Was happening at a distance and velocity that made it visible through the viewport as patterns of drive, signature, and weapons discharge light, rather than as anything a person could narrate in terms of what was actually occurring. I knew what was occurring because I had read the operational schedule and the targeting brief. I logged that the forward elements had commenced at 0814. I logged that the installation's defensive systems had responded. I logged that the response had not been sustained. At 12:25, I logged that the forward elements had confirmed operation complete. Pel Ozar noted, in the communications log, that THVAR3 had been addressed. He used that word specifically, addressed. It was the word in the operational schedule. I used it in my records log too. Day 2 brought THVAR7 and THVAR9, addressed simultaneously by 2 of the 3 carrier elements and their screening formations. Both were extraction installations in the outer Velthus margin, defensive postures assessed as moderate in the targeting brief. The simultaneous addressing took 6 hours and 40 minutes for the larger of 2 and 5 hours and 12 minutes for the smaller. I logged both. Dari Yount, who was working the secondary communications position that day, noted at the end of the watch that the encoding traffic volumes for simultaneous multi-site operations were substantially heavier than she had expected based on the pre-departure communications modeling, and that she would recommend the system parameters be adjusted before day 3. Pel Ozar said he would note the recommendation. He did. The parameters were adjusted. This was, in retrospect, a fairly representative example of what the operations period was actually like for most of the people on the bridge. A continuous series of technical calibrations, communications confirmations, and procedural adjustments, most of which were entirely unremarkable and all of which were logged. Day 3 brought TH-Core 1, which was a command and control facility rather than an extraction installation, and which had a substantially more developed defensive posture. The engagement lasted 9 hours. It was addressed. Day 4 brought 3 extraction facilities and a logistics hub in the collective's outer ring. Day 5 was a transit day between operational zones, which meant the communications traffic shifted from operational to administrative, and the bridge ran a reduced watch rotation, and I caught up on the log backlog from days 1 through 4, which had accumulated enough entries that the catch-up took most of the shift. Day 6 brought THVAR11 and THVAR14, 2 largest active extraction facilities, in the outer Velthus margin, both of which the targeting brief had assessed as having absorbed significant throughput from the absorption drone program in its later years. The brief was specific about this. The material extracted from the human colony sectors, the composite ore from demolished agricultural stations and residential structures and medical relay installations had been processed through these facilities before being routed into the collective expansion program supply chain. This was documented in the same internal archive from which the drone program records had been recovered. I had read this section of the brief during the transit, and had noted it in the personal log without much additional comment. Is how I handled most of the things in the brief that I did not have a useful framework for, which was most of them. On day 6 at 14:38, I logged that THVAR11 had been addressed. At 7:02, I logged that THVAR14 had been addressed. Pel Ozar, reviewing my entries at the end of the watch, noted that my log was consistent with the operational record. I told him it was supposed to be. He said that was correct and moved on to the next item. That was the extent of our exchange about days 5 and 6 combined. Dari Yount, 2 days into operations, had asked me at the end of a watch whether I was doing all right. The question surprised me. I told her I was fine, which was true, in the sense that I was performing my duties without error. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who has asked a question and received a technically correct answer that does not quite the territory of the question. She told me the secondary galley was staying open late for the operations period if I wanted tea. I told her I appreciated that. She nodded and went to her station. The thing I was finding difficult, at that point, was not the operational log. The operational log was easy, or at least uncomplicated, in the way that a procedure is uncomplicated when the procedure is clear, and your execution is correct. What I was finding difficult was a habit I had developed during the transit period, which was to read the names. The 847 names were in Volume 1 of the PEVC series. I had downloaded them to my personal terminal during the transit, because I thought, as a witness designate responsible for the records function, that I should be familiar with the full documentary basis of the operation. This was a reasonable professional judgment, and also, I think now, something else that I did not examine at the time. I had been reading through the names in the evenings, a few hundred at a time, working from the back of the list forward, not in any order that corresponded the collective's logging sequence. I had started from the end, which meant I was working through the most recent deaths first, from year 83, and working back toward year 62. The list had each name, colony sector, the date, and the collective's 5-word classification. Every entry the same, 4,847 times. I want to be clear that I am not presenting this as some kind of heroic or significant act. Reading a list is not heroic. I can tell you is that it focused the operational log in a way that I think it required focusing, for me personally, to do the job correctly. When I logged THVAR 7, addressed and moved to the next entry, I had been, the previous evening, reading names from Sector 6 Palaran, which was the third colony sector the drones had reached, in year 67, and which had lost 621 people in the demolition of its 2 largest agricultural facing installations. 621 names, each one with the collective's classification appended. The classification did not become less remarkable the more times I read it. If anything, it became more so, in the way that something absurd becomes more absurd the longer you look at it steadily without blinking. Incidental displacement loss. Non-factor. Collective sent additional communications during the operational period. I logged them. Their character changed as the days progressed. The early communications, days 1 through 3, maintained the register of official protest, disproportionality concerns, requests for cessation, invocations of treaty frameworks. From day 4 onward, the register shifted. The communications became more specific. They named individual installations. They asked whether there was any condition under which the censure would suspend operations pending negotiation. They asked whether the Provisional Weights Command element would receive a diplomatic communication directly. On day 6, a communication arrived from what the header identified as the Tharessi Collective's First Resource Directorate, the specific office that had authorized the absorption drone program, expressing that the Directorate wished to engage in direct dialogue regarding the operational basis of the censure. Pelosar logged it. I logged it. Rear Admiral Orven, who reviewed the communications log each morning, made no notation in response. On day 7, another communication arrived from the First Resource Directorate. This one more extended, running to 6 paragraphs, which the routing system flagged as priority diplomatic traffic. I confirmed encryption integrity on the receipt, logged the transmission metadata, and moved to the next item in the queue. I did not read the 6 paragraphs. It was not my job to read them. It was my job to log that they had arrived, and confirm the system had received them correctly. Both of those things were true. I logged them and moved on. Day 7 brought what the operational schedule designated as the Velthus Prime Complex, which is the collective central processing installation, the original anchor of the extraction network, the facility from which the absorption drone program had been administered and logged. It was the largest installation on the schedule. The full censure element participated in its address. The engagement lasted 14 hours. I had been reading the previous evening the entries from Sector 9 Marin, the first colony sector, year 62, the beginning of the list. I want to be careful here too. I am not going to tell you that I sat at my communication station on day 7 and felt something surge in me, felt the cold satisfaction of accounting done, felt the 22 years of diplomatic failure and the 4,847 names reduced to a resolution. I did not feel that, or if I did, it was not in any form I could clearly identify at the time, because I was monitoring transmit channels and confirming encryption integrity and logging traffic, and the engagement was happening at a distance, and I was 26 years old, and I did not have at 26 the vocabulary for what I was feeling clearly enough to feel it cleanly. What I can tell you is that at 21:43, when I logged Velthus Prime Complex, addressed, I sat with the entry for a moment before moving to the next item in the log queue. That was all. I moved to the next item. Days 8 through 12 completed the schedule. 3 extraction installations in the collective's northern processing corridor, addressed on days 8 and 9. These were the facilities that had been, according to the targeting brief's supplementary notes, brought online specifically in year 68 to handle the increased extraction throughput from the drone program's 3rd and 4th colony sectors. Their existence was a downstream consequence of the program's success. In the collective's accounting terms, I logged them as addressed and did not note the irony in the official log, because the official log does not have a field for irony, only a field for status. 2 military logistics hubs that the targeting brief had assessed as maintaining operational support for the drone programs. Later years, addressed on day 10. A command relay network that had served as the administrative backbone for the Resource Directorate's extraction accounting system. The system that had generated, and would continue to generate until day 11, new entries in the 5-word format addressed on day 11. And on day 12, 4 facilities in what the collective's own charts designated as secondary extraction zones, which had been established during the years of the absorption drone program, to process the material extracted from the human colony sectors, and which, the targeting brief noted, had materially benefited from that program's output. Those last 4 were addressed at intervals throughout day 12. The final one was confirmed complete at 16:44. At 18:09, Pel Oser made the following entry in the communications log: verified censure, operational schedule complete, 14 of 14 designated addresses confirmed, transmitting completion status to Compact Emergency Council. He transmitted. I confirmed encryption integrity. The transmission went. Rear Admiral Orven stood from the command position, which is something she had not done during the operational period, except to move between the command post and the navigation station. She stood, and she looked at the main display for a time that I measured, without intending to measure it, as approximately 40 seconds. The display showed the operational status board, which had 14 entries. All 14 now showed the same status indicator, in the same color. She looked at it. Then she said to the bridge in general that the watch section was dismissed, that second watch would take over, and that the provisional wait would begin transit back to compact space at 20 CO. Unless she ordered otherwise, she walked to the aft corridor access and was gone. She did not order otherwise. I stayed at my station until second watch arrived, finished my log entries, confirmed that the records archive was intact and correctly indexed, and then went to the secondary galley, which was still open. Dariant was there. So was a weapons specialist whose name I have not included here, because he has not given me permission to include it. We drank tea. No one said much of anything. The provisional waits drives came up to transit power at 1958, and the ship's systems shifted through the particular set of sounds that any ship makes when it transitions from operational posture to transit top posture, and those sounds were not unlike the sounds the ship made during any other transit, which is a thing I found notable at the time and still find notable, that the sounds are the same. What I want to talk about now is the cost. I am aware that much of what I have written above can be read as a kind of clinical account, and I want to be clear that the clinical account is intentional, because the clinical account is what I had at the time, and it is what I think the requires. But the cost is not clinical, and leaving it out of the record would be an error. Not a procedural error, an error of accuracy, and the records officer's job, above everything else, is accuracy. 4,847 people were killed by the Tharessi Collective's absorption drone program between year 62 and year 84. That is the direct count. That is the number of names in the list. What the direct count does not include is the fringe colony worlds themselves. What happened to them across 22 years of drone program, activity and diplomatic uncertainty and resettlement disruption, and the slow particular unraveling that occurs when a community loses its infrastructure repeatedly over 2 decades, and the parent government is occupied with arbitration panels and treaty language disputes, rather than rebuilding what was demolished. The Compact's resettlement assistance to the affected sectors during the drone program years was, by the Volume 4 survey's assessment, inadequate relative to the scale of ongoing demolition, not through deliberate policies, but through the particular failure mode of bureaucratic systems that are designed to address discrete events and cannot adequately respond to discrete events that keep occurring before response to the previous one is complete. Sector 9 Marin's Colony Alpha 3 was demolished in year 62. It was partially rebuilt by year 64. The drones returned in year 66 and demolished the rebuilt structures. It was partially rebuilt again by year 68. The drones returned in year 71. The colony was not rebuilt after year 71. There was no one left with the resources or the willingness to do it a third time. The Compact's resettlement registry shows the surviving population of Colony Alpha 3 as dispersed to 9 different receiving sectors, none of which were in the Sector 9 Marin region. The Compact's own survey data, which is in Volume 4 of the pre-VC series, assessed the 9 affected colony sectors at the time of the Censure's authorization. The surveys found that the combined registered population of those 9 sectors in year 84 was approximately 41% of what it had been in year 61, the year before the drone program began. Some of that reduction was direct mortality. A larger portion was emigration, people who had rebuilt once, twice, or 3 times, and had eventually calculated that the probability of building a 4th time exceeded their willingness to remain. The surveys noted, with the care of a document written for a legal determination, that once established fringe colony settlements lose specific things when their population drops below certain thresholds that are not easily recovered even when the population is later rebuilt. The institutional knowledge that accumulates in a community over time, specific local expertise in local conditions, the generational connections that make a colony a place rather than an installation. A colony that has been rebuilt twice from near zero is not the same colony. The people who remain are not the same population. The skills that existed in the community that was demolished in year 62 are not recovered by resettling the colony in year 68. The children who grew up in the 9 receiving sectors where Sector 9 Marin's survivors were dispersed did not grow up in Sector 9 Marin. They grew up somewhere else. That is a fact about their lives, and it is one of the things that the verified Censures 14 addressed. Installations cannot account for, no matter how precisely the accounting is done. The survey called these compounding losses. I called them that in my records log too. It seemed like the correct terminology. I finished reading the names on the transit back. I had been reading from the end forward, working back through the years. I finished on the 5th day of transit, working through the final pages of the year 62 entries, which is the Sector 9 Marin entries, which are the first ones in the list when you read forward from the beginning. 618 names. The first colony sector. Year 62, month 4, the morning the drones arrived. The last name on the list in my reading order. The first name in the list if you start from the beginning, first person the collective's resource directorate classified, was a woman named Darren Oyas, age 34, agricultural station supervisor at Sector 9 Marin Colony Alpha 3. The collective's entry for Darren Oyas listed her date of death as year 62, month 4, day 3, local 0322, which is 8 minutes after the emergency transmitter at the administrative post was activated, classified her as incidental displacement loss non-factor. She was 34. She was an agricultural station supervisor, is a specific job involving specific knowledge about specific growing conditions in a specific place, the kind of knowledge that takes years to develop and that does not transfer when the person who held it is gone. The entry did not contain any of this. The entry contained her name, her location, her date of death, and 5 words. I noted her name in my personal log. I want to say something about what the verified censure was and was not, because I think the record should include this, and because I am the records officer, and it is therefore to some degree, my job. The censure was not justice in the philosophical sense. Because justice in the philosophical sense requires something that military operations are not capable of providing. The restoration of what was taken, and what was taken from those 9 colony sectors across 22 years is not restorable by fleet action. The censure destroyed 14 Tharessi collective installations. It ended the absorption drone program permanently because the program's administrative and logistical infrastructure no longer exists. The Resource Directorate's accounting system that generated the 5-word classifications. The system that had produced 847 entries in 22 years and had continued to generate new entries until day 11 of the censure's operation. That system was addressed on day 1, and it does not generate entries anymore. The censure established, in practical terms, that the compact will not spend 22 years in arbitration panels while its civilians are being killed by a treaty partner's automated systems. That is what it was. What it was not is the return of 4,847 people to the lives the collective's Resource Directorate classified as non-factors. What it was not is the restoration of the 3-generation agricultural knowledge that Sector 9 Marin's Colony Alpha 3 had been building since year 51, the year it was founded. What it was not is the childhood that the children born in Sector 6 Palaran in year 67 would have had if the drone program had not reached their parents' settlement in that year. What it was not is the colony that Sector 9 Marin Colony Alpha 3 might have become if it had not been demolished 3 times. The censure addressed 14 Tharessi installations. The Tharessi Resource Directorate's program addressed something that cannot be addressed in return, because it cannot be rebuilt, because time only runs in one direction and 22 years of it has gone. I note this not as a critique of the censure. I was present for the censure, and I believe it was necessary, and I believe the operational schedule was correct, and I believe that 14 designated addresses is the appropriate language for 14 Tharessi installations, whose destruction was warranted by 22 years and 847 names. I note it because the record should contain it and because I am still the records officer, and the records officer's job is to ensure the record is complete. On the 13th day of transit, I filed the formal witness designate attestation, is the document by which an officer in my function confirms to the compact's legal record that the operation was conducted in accordance with the Article 7 determination, the operational schedule, and the notification requirements, and that the witness designate observed no significant deviation from authorized parameters. I had observed no significant deviation. I filed the attestation. The system confirmed receipt. The record was, in the formal sense, complete. In the informal sense, which is the sense I have been writing in for this entire account. I want to close with what happened on the last evening of transit was not recorded in any official log. I was in the secondary galley, which was quiet at that hour, and I had my personal terminal and a cup of tea that I was making some effort to drink while it was still warm, and I had the names list open on the terminal. I was on the first page. Darren Oyas, Sector 9 Marin Colony Alpha 3, Year 62, Month 4, Day 3, Local 03, 2, Incidental Displacement Loss, Non-Factor. I read her name aloud, which is not something I had done at any point during the previous months, and which I did not plan to do until I did it. My voice in the empty galley was the only sound that was not the ship's systems. It did not accomplish anything in the operational sense. The censure was complete. The record was attested. Darren Oyas had been dead for 22 years, and saying her name on a warship in transit did not change that. I read it aloud anyway. Then I closed the terminal and I finished my tea, and I went back to my station, and I began the end of transit communications check, and the ship ran through its systems in the way it always does. And the secondary drive signatures shifted toward deceleration, and we were going home. The compact's public record of the verified censure, released 6 months after our return, listed the operation's outcomes in the following terms. 14. Tharessi Collective Military and Extraction Installations addressed. Absorption Drone Program dismantled. Article 7 determination satisfied. It listed the offense for 800 civilian deaths across 9 colony sectors over 22 years, classified by the Tharessi Collective as incidental displacement loss. It listed the response: 350 warships, 12 operational days, 14 addresses. Public record does not include the 41 pages from Sector 9 Marin. It does not include the Volume 4 survey data about compounding losses. It does not include Darren Oyas's name, or the specific facts of what she knew and where she knew it, and what year the colony she had spent her working life building was demolished for the first time. Public records are summaries, and summaries leave things out, and that is what they are for. Full record is in the Provisional Weights Operational Archive, PIRI VC Series, Volumes 1 through 7, plus the Witness Designate Attestation, plus the Communications Logs, plus the Operational Logs, plus my Personal Records Addendum, which I filed as a supplementary document, and which I was informed by the Records Bureau is technically irregular, but not prohibited. The full record includes all 4,847 names. It includes the Tharessi Collective's 5-word classification for each of them. It includes the 14 addressed installations, logged in the Operational SEAL Schedules language, which is the language of accounting. Entry closed. Count addressed, non-factor reclassified. I am 31 years old now. I have been a junior bridge officer, then a bridge officer, and next month I will be, if the promotion review goes as expected, a senior bridge officer, which means I will be the one filing assessments of people I describe as adequate in the technical sense and unlikely to cause embarrassment, and I will mean it as the same compliment Commander Wynne meant when she filed mine. I have Commander Wynne's assessment in a frame. I also have, printed and filed in a binder on the shelf above my desk, the first and last page of the Sector 9 Marin Appendix. 618 names. Darren Oyas at the top, the last name at the bottom, each with the collective's classification. I keep it because I am the records officer. I keep it because someone should. I keep it because the record should be complete, and the record is not complete unless it contains the names, and I am the one who read them, so I am the one who keeps them. The verified censure addressed 14 installations in 12 days. What the fringe colonies lost over 22 years has no address. That is the cost. That is what the record requires me to say, and I have said it, and it stands. The record of the Tharessi Collective's absorption drone program, and the record of the Compact's response to it, will outlast everyone involved in both. Records do that. They persist past the people who made them, and the people who suffered them, and the people who answered them, and they say, to whoever reads them afterward, this happened, this is what it cost, this is what was done about it, and this is what could not be undone. The record does not resolve anything, it does not restore anything. It simply says what happened accurately, without omission, for as long as anyone maintains the archive. I maintain the archive. That is my job. That is, I think, the only thing I can usefully do for Darren Oyas at this remove of years. I keep her name in the record. I keep the record complete. I do not round down.